we deal with these different color combinations with something that we have codified in the early 20th century as harmonies. And I don't even think 100 years has gone by since we first started talking about these particular harmonies. That is not the way artists always worked before. But in the 20th century, we started realizing that we no longer relied on nature to give us our clues about what worked best in a composition. So we started creating these categories that we now, on hindsight, call harmonies. And the first one to talk about is monochrome harmony. And right away you might say, well, if monochrome harmony is what it sounds like, one color and just value differences, then what's this yellow moon or sun doing there? And it's probably a moon. I'm going to use that as an exception because I don't think it's that important. It is hard in the history of art, especially before the 20th century, to find a lot of monochrome harmonies like this that are really based on a color, because that wasn't seen to be a good use of color. So this is a forest fire, and it makes perfect sense for this to be as red as it is. This makes more sense. Now there is some yellow, there's some orange, and there are even touches of red in this. But this is close enough to a monochrome harmony. It does make our point. It is really a value-based composition. Not very complicated. There are no strong color relationships in it. The color is almost an overlay on top of the value composition. I have subtle color differences here. The dress this woman is wearing is just a little cooler than the divan that she is seated on. And again, because there's so much red in there, any red that might appear on her skin is barely perceptible. She looks very, very pale, which was something that would be desired in this case. But here, I do have only red as a color. Now, there are touches of green in here. There are touches of blue and blue-violet in here. They're very, very minor. The complexion is not entirely just red. But our dominant color is red, and almost anything that we would call a color is going to be a reddish color here. But in this case, as opposed to the other ones that I showed you, it is that red color is seen against a non-color, or a chromatic gray, a very soft color. This is pretty much a sketch. This is pretty much not meant to be a finished painting, I had the feeling, but meant to be a value-based sketch, and there is some color in it. But there's only one color. There are no color relationships, so it's not very complex. Monochrome harmony is very, very easy for us to take in. Now, in this case, we have one color, largely, but we have a wide range of value differences. We go from very light to very dark to dark medium to light medium. And we also have saturation differences because of the sunset here. So this is richer than what you see in most monochrome harmonies, and I think a very successful one too. Frederick Remington liked painting a lot of pictures in moonlight, and most of them tend to be sort of bluish. Now his version of moonlight, as you can tell here, is a spotlight version of moonlight. Moonlight is seen to be very bright from this point of view. And it's not the way you would always experience moonlight. But you know it's moonlight because you see there's stars in the sky. What's so ironic about this is we know now in the early 21st century two things. One, that at night greens look brighter than any other colors. They don't look more green, they just look more light, because at night we can't really see colors very well. Our eyes don't have enough to work with to see color. And two, infrared goggles that we're used to seeing on news footage and things tend to show you green images, and this almost looks like an infrared goggle images, but made many, many years before we ever had such things as infrared goggles. Analogous harmony is our next step, and it is a little bit more complicated than monochrome harmony. It now allows us to have color relationships. Here we have a number of relationships between warm colors. So I've got a dark red, I've got a red orange, I've got a yellow orange, I've got this complexion, and I've got some yellow up in here. All of those colors are next to each other on a color wheel. They make sense together because they're neighbors. They share things. They're very easy for us to visually digest. A lot of the same is happening here. And this has a lot to do with the nature, just simply the nature of light in an interior. There's not a great deal I can say about this, but it's a very good example of a analogous harmony. There are reds, red oranges, and yellow oranges in here. The big deal in this composition actually is the saturation difference of our main figure seen against a desaturated background. This is an analogous harmony and an unusual one. This is probably not taking its cues from nature entirely. There's some fancifulness in here, but this is a violet. It's not a purple, by the way. Purple has more red in it than violet does. So this is a violet, this is a blue violet, and this has a lot of red violet in it. They're all nearby colors. This looks so cool that this winds up looking warm in this context, but if you put this in an orange context, it's going to look cool. This is analogous with one exception. This. The patina of this statue is actually the complement, the opposite of this red-orange color. And it tends to catch our eye right away. In fact, there's a good chance that when I showed this, when this image first appeared on the screen, that your eye went here first and then went here. I just showed you this before, but it's a very good example of an analogous harmony, as is this. Analogous harmonies help us a lot with atmosphere and mood, partly because in low light situations you're more aware of the nature of the light source, which brings me to this idea of a subcategory of an analogous harmony. And that is when the light source dominates the local color. I've not gotten around to explaining local color, but that's what you think a color really is. A red apple is red, except in green light it's not red anymore, it's green. So the local color, the dominant thing that is filtering light here are the green leaves of the trees. So this is green, not just because the objects we're looking at are green, but because the light coming down into it is green too. The same thing is happening here. Dominance of hue is a way of creating an analogous harmony by looking through a filter or by lighting the scene with a filter. There are many ways of creating that kind of filter. This is skylight. Skylight is a blue light source. Although we're looking directly at a point in the sky where the sun is setting, the sky above this is a bluish light source, and therefore everything lit is going to be bluish. Some of the same is true in this Degas painting, although this is done in a photographer's studio. I don't know what the lighting would have been like. Again, this is skylight. This is blue light from the sky that is our primary light source. There is no direct rays of the sun lighting anything here. This is an artificial light source, and it is stage lights coming from below, footlights, which weren't necessarily always green. But as you can see, the reason why these colors are the way they are is because everything's lit with a green light. Everything is lit with the amber glow of the yellow light from the stained glass window here. Candlelight is a very low energy light source that if you actually photographed it, you would realize is red, not yellow. But painters have tended to use it as a warm white light source. And we use it now a great deal for perspective, atmosphere, and mood in current late 20th century, early first 20th century images. This is an overcast sky. We rarely see this. I'm recording this in Southern California. We hardly ever see this condition here. But I've grown up in parts of the country where I do see the sky giving you this kind of color feel. This is also late afternoon light. This is light near the horizon, and it is not bright daylight. It is light near the horizon. You can tell here by looking at the shadow, which is nearly horizontal. And that means the atmosphere itself is the filter. The atmosphere does not let white light through. It doesn't let the blue parts through, so you get more warm light. This is warm, and this could be warm for a wide variety of reasons. One of the reasons this may look so warm is varnish. Varnish is a yellowish coating that is meant to protect the paint, and with age it gets more yellow. And sometimes painters have consciously painted brighter colors underneath, knowing that the yellow is going to be interfering with them later. Now, there are a lot of reasons why this painting looks the way it does, and I don't know the exact one. I can make a lot of guesses. It's a very yellow and red painting. I strongly suspect the painter did not want the painting to look like this right now. This could be because of varnish, emphasizing the warm colors in the painting. And you don't see any real blue anywhere, but you do see some violet, and violet does have red in it, so that can maybe be that reason. It could be that this is taken from a slide, and the slide emulsion on celluloid has simply yellowed with age. It was not kept very well. It got too warm, and the slide just turned out badly. It could be that it was not photographed well in the beginning. Or it could have been that he wanted this kind of atmospheric effect. We don't know that for sure. So I have the feeling, along the same lines, that this painter did not want this painting to look like this. I have the feeling that if you went to a museum, you would not see this painting looking like this. This is probably an inaccurate reproduction for a wide variety of reasons. Some of that is true here. There is a yellowness to this that may not have been the intention of the artist. I don't know that for sure, but there's a good chance that the artist actually wanted to see the sky and wanted a much more balanced view of color that was not dominated by warmth to that degree. I doubt very much if this painting was intended to look like this. In fact, I think that this is more based on bad reproduction than anything else, and this is how much we've been missing in this painting. Some of the same is true here, although this is even stronger because this was printed. Although this may have been a painting at first, that this reproduction was from a printed source. So when I do take away some of the yellowness of paper and some of the redness that may have come from the red inks being the strongest inks used, we get a very, very different picture here. And it is easy to believe that we are supposed to see this wide variety of color in these areas. This is overwhelmingly red. In fact, it is so red that the greens are really muddy and we don't really have a color. They're sort of olives instead of green. So if we take away some of that color cast, there's a good chance that it was intended to look like this. So I'm going to ask you to sort of abandon the idea of absolutes. That to ask which one is more accurate may not be a really completely fair question. We may not have a most accurate. That leads us to this problem. We are dealing with reproductions here. These are two different reproductions of the same painting, and they're very, very different from each other. So are these. I don't know why, and I don't know which one is more accurate, and I'd have to actually look at the painting itself. So we have to sort of find a place in the middle almost to be more accurate. Here is one version of this painting, and this is fairly well balanced and has a lot of blues in it. The blues are gone in this version, and you may notice it's also been cropped a bit differently too. It is the same painting. It is not a rough version and a final painting, because that can be a different problem altogether. This is the uncropped version of this painting, and there's a good reason that it was supposed to look like this. You can see some whites in here. That means that none of the yellows of varnish are really influencing the whites, and yellows of varnish are not getting in the way in the blue of the cloud. But somebody has found a way of reinterpreting this painting and a way of cropping it to their ends. And these are both supposed to represent the exact same painting. Which one is the right one? I can't tell you. What the painting was supposed to look like, what the painting looked like when Howard Pyle did it is one thing. What the first reproduction was supposed to look like is actually something else. So these come from different sources actually. Well, as we go on harmonies, the next most complicated harmony is actually triadic harmony. And that means that the main colors used are all equally distant on a color wheel. The most common ones are going to be red, blue, and yellow. But that doesn't mean that those are the only kinds of triadic harmonies. In fact, these are all triadic harmonies. Red, yellow, blue is very popular. It has been they are psychological anchor points in human understanding. And it did not take any sense of color theory for people to want to celebrate mainly those colors. So I have a lot of triadic harmony paintings to show you that are really based on red, yellow, blue. One of the differences is that they seem very different from each other, and therefore it looks like you're using a very wide and wide-ranging palette. Even in more contemporary times, we still wanted to make the most we could with colors like this. Now these are softer, but there is still red, yellow, blue as our primary colors, and everything else, except for the sky, is less saturated than that, so we don't really get confused. This is meant to be cheery and happy, so it's going to be very saturated, and we're going to use colors that can be as pure as possible in something like this. This is not so saturated, but it is after the ball. It is after an occasion when you are trying to look your best and trying to shine, to sparkle. But these aren't red, yellow, blue. These are what we called secondary colors just a little while ago. This is orange, green, and purple, or orange, green, and violet. And these are also triadic colors. Some of the same is happening here. Although you could make an argument and say, oh, Richard, this is a double complement. And actually, I'm not going to argue with you. It's actually not that important. Okay, I have to take a second here to distinguish something that art schools don't always distinguish. Complementary harmonies are not the same as complementary contrasts. A complementary harmony tries to harmonize opposites. And generally what you get when you mix opposites in paints are grays and browns. So we will see two opposite colors, whether they're orange and blue, whether they are red and green, mixed together to create grays and browns as a transitional element, so that we're not seeing a red directly against a green to make the red and green pop. That is something we now do in the 21st century and in the 20th century. And we like pop. But painters didn't always like that. So it is easy to create a sense of unified harmony by only using two elements and mixing those elements to harmonize them. So these are examples of complementary harmony paintings, and this looks completely natural. You know that you could stand there looking at this. Some of the same is true here in this Sargent painting. Yes, this is an example of dominance of hue, but it is also an example of complementary harmony. It is red and green paint that was used to make this painting. There is no blue that I can find anywhere in here. There's no violet. There's very little, if any, yellow. It is two paints, and you can do an enormous amount with them. This actually goes back to something I commented on a little while ago called the natural color system, that we see things in opposites. That is part of our brain mechanism, or actually our eye mechanism, to use this idea of polar opposites to make sense out of what we're seeing. So it's very comfortable for us to see a painting done primarily in opposites that concentrates on the neutrals that you make with those opposites. Now in this case, I suspect strongly that this blue-green came from one of the newer chemically based paints used, and it has a very high tinting strength, so it seems highly saturated to us right now and may not have looked that way when the painting was actually done. Looks practically photographic in its realism. You do not think, oh, where are the violets? Where are the reds? Actually, you have red oranges here. This is a very natural looking image. You may have never noticed this before, but actually most of your life is spent looking at images that are really just based on two colors. This is a Pre-Raphaelite image. It has a metaphorical content. The sun is setting behind our chivalrous knight, who is putting to death the threat, this one woman. Our eye goes from here, the setting sun, all the way down to her. Mucha used a wide variety of colors, but very often Mucha was using complements because these were for reproduction. These were not meant to be original paintings all the time. They were meant to be reproduced as posters. And printing technology, when Mucha was working, is not the same as it is now. So it helped to have a limited palette and to know how to extend that limited palette to create this wonderful richness. What you are looking at is a red, orange, and cyan composition. That is just about the only colors you see there. There may be black, but I doubt if you need it. And it is quite vivid and quite naturalistic looking. The same is true here. And here, in this neutral foreground, is where this really comes to life. And instead of here, where you have blue-green colors put very close to and sometimes next to the red-orange colors, here where they mix into much more subtle chromatic grays is where you get a sense of richness. This is a little bit more contrasted. Dark and light contrast is more important here, but it is still based on the same ideas. Even this is a red and green painting, and by now you can see how valuable this is and how realistic it is, but you can also see in this one that we could have emphasized probably browns more, and I have the feeling it is the nature of that green paint that has remained more saturated than the other paints. This now looks a little bit more realistic to us, probably. This is highly desaturated, but it's still based on the same idea that I just talked about. There's an added element to this. We have red fruits, I'm going to suppose, and we have a great deal of green, but we also have yellow. Well, when we talked about an additive color wheel, red and green make yellow. And this is something we are used to seeing with our eyes. So it is not the way paints work, but it is the way perception works. And very often a yellow can help join this red and green together to make it even create more unity. This also is a red, orange, and blue-green painting, yet looks completely naturalistic. This is a more difficult one because it's yellow and purple. And yellow and purple, although they don't need to all the time, but yellow and purple often give you browns when they mix. It is harder to make a gray between yellow and purple. And that's actually mainly because of the way we get our purples in our pigments and dyes too. But again, this is something that you can accept very easily. It still is a limited palette. The only exception here is a little bit of blue-violet here and maybe a little bit there. This is also yellow and violet, and where you see yellow and violet used most successfully as a complementary pair for harmonic painting is at dawn, and that's what we're looking at here. So good, it says sunrise. You'll also notice not very much value contrast, because that is true at dawn, especially in a very humid or very moist environment like this. In this case, we have a yellow and violet for different reasons, and this is more of a different kind of metaphor. This is a young king. He is shown to be royalty because he's wearing purple. Royalty and purple have been closely associated for 2,000 years because of the Greek and Roman empires. And the yellow pretty much represents gold because gold and purple look so good together, and also represent royalty too. But in this case, we're back to what we saw at sunrise at the beach. This is snow. The snow is illuminated with skylight, so there's blue in it, but light is just beginning to stream on top of the snow. These are opposite colors, yet they don't hit you as opposites because there's not a lot of dark light contrast to make them in your face. This is even a more subtle version of a yellow and violet. This is more yellow, orange, blue, violet, actually, composition. Not as subtle, but value is doing most of the work in this case. And in this case, I'm not an art historian, so I cannot say that this is true, but when I looked at this, I thought there's a good chance that this artist was colorblind. Because the most common kind of colorblindness is the inability to distinguish greens and purples from each other. They both read as somewhat gray. 4.5% of the Caucasian male population of the world suffers from that kind of colorblindness. It's called deuteranopia. And we look at this and think, what's wrong with the purples? There are a lot of possible reasons, but I have the feeling the artist might not have noticed that they were saturated as they are. Orange and blue is a very comfortable set of complementary complements. I started with reds and greens, and then I went into yellows and violets, but orange and blue is a very earthy, very wide-ranging kind of complementary pair. Again, we see it in things that are natural. The oranges relate to wood very often. Blue relates to sky and skylight. We would not normally think of this as a limited palette painting, but there's really not much in it besides orange and blue. And notice that as a complementary harmony, it is concentrating on grays and browns. A little more saturation here, and it looks like it is more wide-ranging color, but it is still an orange and blue painting, as is this, and as was most of what Vermeer did. Vermeer's paintings that he did outdoors, landscapes and images of towns and things like that, often concentrated a bit more on red. But he was painting at a time when some people were trying to guess what are the colors of light. And Christopher Huygens commented around the time of Vermeer that light was made of yellow and blue. We don't know if that's why Vermeer painted yellow and blue paintings, or yellow, orange, blue, violet, actually, paintings. But that is his primary color palette. There are exceptions. There's red here. But we recognize a Vermeer painting partly because of that palette that I just mentioned. This is a classic example of a complementary harmony using orange and blue. And you'll notice there is no strong blue and there's no strong orange, because that would ruin it. But this is the way you would actually look at this yourself if you were watching this. Some of the same is true here. There is also this other little element. There's a little tiny bit of proportional color here, because that does not exist anywhere else. It's almost in the center of the composition. It's meant to make a big impact. This is exactly the way you would see this. There's almost no color here. The only real color that you see is in the sky, but actually that sky color and orange was used to mix all of this in the foreground and it makes the sky look a lot more powerful. We also use this for the idea of temperature. So in this case, this cityscape in the bottom looks almost like there is a furnace underneath. There is a lot of activity. There is a lot of manufacturing being done there. And as we go towards the top, towards the sky, we then project atmospheric perspective into that to make it seem even further and further away. Split complementary harmony is a combination of triadic and complementary harmony. You use split complementary harmony when you want largely the sense that you get from a complementary harmony, but you want to expand one end of that complement. So in this case, we have a blue-violet in here, blue-greens in here, and a yellow-orange in here. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, this is probably our most popular version of split complementary harmonies, those three colors. Some of that's happening here. We have a blue and a blue-green and a red. We have something similar here, but here we're actually concentrating on the red. So here we have a red-orange and a yellow-orange against a green. But there's a lot of desaturation here, so this is not a classic example of this. Here we have a red-orange and a yellow and a violet. This, which is an often used split complementary harmony scheme, we have a yellow and a green seen against a purple. The complement of purple on the subtractive color wheel is actually yellow-green, not yellow or green. So these tend to split the complement of this color and give you more range in one end. And that is the most succinct way I can try to describe this. This is the exact same color palette as the painting I just showed you, with the exception of this very important tulip. But other than that, it is the same color palette. This is the color palette I began with. This is yellow-orange, blue-violet, and blue-green. There's our blue-green, our blue-violet, and our yellow-orange. This is the color palette that we see next to the water very often. The combination of water, sky, and sand or dirt. This is a very almost in-your-face version of it, but it certainly does help us understand why these colors tend to work together this way. This is an unusual painting, and I think the best harmony I can use to describe this is split complementary. But we have very soft yellow greens that tend to complicate it in here. This is a very strongly delineated split complementary harmony, and this is a softer one. But I was just saying that split complementary harmonies are things that you see around water a lot. We have a blue sky, and the sky is usually blue-violet, not blue-green, usually. We have blue-green water, and then we have the color of stone in the buildings. That is true here, too. And it's true in more naturalistic settings, the things that do not have so many man-made structures in them. In fact, I sometimes wondered if the popularity of this particular harmony is really based, as it is so strongly here, on what life is like at the edge of the ocean. Blue-violet, excuse me, this is a closer one. This is almost violet, and blue-green, and then we have oranges and yellow oranges in here. Double complementary harmonies are two pairs of opposites, and it's as simple as that. It's not a very complex thing. If you're going to use them, as Nick Pugh did here, concentrate on one color. In this case, Nick concentrated on the green. The complement of the green is red, but the red is there just to allow the green to really sing. And then we have a sort of yellowish color and a violet color. This is our second pair of complements in here. And they are not as important as the first pair, so don't use 25% of four colors. You're going to create chaos if you try to do that. In this case, the Sargent painting, we have double complements. We have a green and some red, but not a great deal of red, and we have this blue-violet and yellow-orange. This is a better example because it really makes the point better. We have a pair of complements back here in the mountains, and we have a pair of complements here in the foreground. While doing research for this DVD, I looked at a lot, tens of thousands of old paintings, and realized, although I've been teaching color theory for 17 years or longer, that this was the dominant sense of harmony in the 19th century for landscape paintings, especially. Double complementary harmony is almost the definition of 19th century harmony. This was how nature was supposed to look, two sets of complements. And the foreground is almost always red and green, and the background is almost always a blue, violet, yellow, orange. There are certainly exceptions to this. But this is the way that paintings were seen to be perceived at that time. This is the way that landscape was perceived. And this idea of harmony, a word that we get from the world of music, is what paintings are supposed to do. They were supposed to give you a harmonious sense of beauty. Now, this is much older, but it is still two sets of complements. I have a blue, violet, yellow, orange in here, and I have a red and green in here. This is more delineated, more exacting than most paintings of its period, and it's somewhat more advanced. It's almost a little bit modern. Same painter, using a similar palette. Alphonse Mucha again. This is the double complementary harmony, and he had a bigger printing budget, so he could afford to do it here, as we are seeing here also. This is strongly delineated. We are not seeing much of one color mixed into another one, and that's probably one of the unusual things about this painting. There's a coloring book quality that sash is red-violet, this is yellow-orange, this is green, and do not let any reflected light get in the way. Here we see two sets of complements, but they're not that strong. This orange makes the blue make more sense, and this and this are greens. There's an exception though. This looks like it was intended to be a yellow, and when you start neutralizing a yellow, it can rapidly turn to green, so the perception becomes green when you do that. Pre-Raphaelites used this harmony all the time, but then again, they were 19th century painters. They were just simply using more saturated colors when they worked. This is based on two sets of complements. The complements are red, there we go, red and green, and then also blue and orange. The same thing is true in this. These are supposed to be two different views of Rome, current day Rome and antique Rome. Landscapes again will often lead us to double complements. This is much more decidedly a double complement. Our second pair of complements, much more subtle, is in the foreground down here. This is a 20th century painting, and we see the double complements much more clearly. You can see that areas are devoted to these colors in a very clear way. In fact, here we have very strongly delineated shadows that are the complement of the area around them, and then this tree trunk and this grass are also a set of complements. Monet, a major colorist, loved looking at what light does to local color, and this is a really strong double complementary painting. In fact, everything you might expect from the double complementary painting can be found here. This is true here. Our foreground is red-green. Our background is yellow-orange, blue-violet. And over again, we will see this. This gives you a very strong sense of completion in a painting. It feels like you have captured an entire world of color when using these two colors like this. Notice here we have reds and greens where the sun is lit, and here we have oranges and blues largely in the shadow area. That goes directly against what we are told light does in low light situations and bright light situations. Normally, bright light will illuminate more blues and oranges, and low light, shadow light, will illuminate more greens and reds. This is a little bit more artificial in that the wall on the background is meant to be a local color, and light does not influence it all that much. And this is certainly a little bit more modern than what we have been looking at. William Merritt Chase's Blue Kimono is blue set off by orange and yellow set off by some of the blue-violet in here and some of the blue-violet in here. I didn't say that right. There we go. Green and red, and then blue and violet. Could have done that one a little bit better. It is unusual to find triple complementary harmonies. I tend to avoid them when I teach because they are so hard to find. But while doing research for this, I found a number of examples of this. So here we have a violet and a yellow, we have a red and a green, and we have a blue and an orange. And they're almost paired together, here and here, here and here, and here and here. Mary Cassatt loved showing bounce light, loved showing reflected light coming in the faces, and this is also a triple complementary harmony, as is this, and in this case they are paired again. Blue and orange, red and green, and then a very subtle yellow and violet back here. It's not chaotic. This is actually a very well managed version of this idea.